Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a palette bingo. I'm really excited for this one because I typically do palette bingo videos on palettes that are more colorful in my collection, but I wanted to really focus on this episode to do one with a neutral palette because I want to show you guys that if you're in a rut with your makeup collection, doing a palette bingo on any palette can be really refreshing and a good way to just make you want to use the palettes in your collection. If you're anything like me, 9 times out of 10 or more, to be honest, you are reaching for a neutral palette. So that's really what I wanted to focus on today. I did go ahead and put up these two palettes on my Instagram. So I added this poll to my Instagram and you guys voted that you wanted to see the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette. So that's the one I'm going to be featuring today. If you guys still want to see the Sydney Grace Unbreakable Bond palette in this format of a video for a palette bingo, let me know. I will try to feature this next month or maybe in March, but I could definitely film that for you guys if you still want to see this Sydney Grace palette. But for today, we're going to dip into this one from Glaminatrix. So if you're not familiar with this palette, here's what the inside looks like. It is a very beautiful palette. This palette took a very long time to get here. It was like on pre-order the year before last, and a lot of people were very excited about this palette, including myself. So I'm really excited to use this for a palette bingo. This will be my first palette bingo with this palette actually, so I myself am also excited to just do one with a more neutral toned palette. Now the mattes in this palette are a bit mid-tone. They're very buildable, which is great, but for me with such fair skin, sometimes I struggle to use this palette to create one conclusive look. A lot of times I'm dipping into a lighter matte shade to help me out because the matte shades in this pull a bit deep on my skin. But I love the shimmer shades. They're so dimensional. They're so shimmery and glittery and sparkly. I love them. So I'm really excited to just see what grouping I get. If you're not familiar with this type of video, a lot of creators make them, but the way that I do them is I just pull up a random generator. I have the Pretty Random app on my iPad. I will select 5 shades to use from the palette. So I have it set to where I can pick between 1 and 15 as a number. I do have re-rolls prevented so that way I don't get the same shade twice. So depending on what number I pull from the app, I go 1 through 15 or 1 through 5 all the way down to 15. So I always go left to right, top to bottom. So let's go ahead and just pick 5 different shades to use. So the first one will be 15. So this one is called Nothing to See. It's a nice like gray toned taupey sort of a shade. And I'm just gonna swatch them on the back of my hand so that we can see the color story come together. And the way I like to do my palette bingos is that I have to use all 5 shades that I pull, but I can use more from the palette if I want to. I just have to use the ones that I selected. Okay, so we got 15. Next is going to be 3, which is the shade called Untouched, which is a bit more of like a mauvey kind of purpley sort of a shade. So 2 mattes so far. All right, let's get 3 more. So next up is going to be a shade at number 9. Oh my gosh, another matte shade. This one is called Down to Earth. Watch me get all mattes from this gorgeous shimmery palette. Okay, so far 3 mattes. Hopefully I'm getting some shimmers here. All right, we need 2 more. Number 1. Okay, we got a shimmer, thank goodness. So this one is called Naked Eye. This is one of my favorites, but to be honest, they're all one of my favorites. So I do really love this shade though. It is so reflective. The great thing about doing a palette bingo with a palette like this is you really can't go wrong. You could pull 3 shades for just a day-to-day look, and with a palette like this, everything is going to go with everything else. So it's not as risky, so to speak, as a colorful palette, and you might end up with a more wearable look regardless versus some more colorful palettes where you might end up with like a blue and red eye look. Okay, our 5th shade is going to be number 10. Okay, another shimmer shade, so that's good. So this one is called Stripped Back. I really like this shade. It is a kind of gunmetal silver, but it has a hint of lavender in it, especially depending on what it's paired with. So I really actually love that shade as well. It's very unique to my collection, I would say. So here's the 5 shades that I got that I have to use in today's look. I don't think I'll dip into anything else. I think I'll just stick with these 5. So I obviously already have all of my face makeup on and everything except for the eyeshadow. So I'm gonna go ahead and prime the eyelids, and I'm actually going to kick it a little bit old school and use the Urban Decay eyeshadow primer potion. I was actually watching Kelly Gooch's newest video, I think right now, and it was like a throwback to a bunch of old makeup, and she used this primer, and I thought, well, I'm gonna reach into that today. but this one's definitely, I feel like, a classic in the makeup world. Because the matte shades are a bit deeper than I tend to like starting out, I am going to actually dip into a face powder. This is the CoverGirl one, and I forgot that I kind of broke it apart a little bit the other day, so I did just drop some, but hopefully you guys can see. It's just a face powder, and I'm going to set the eyeshadow primer down because I think it'll help me blend those kind of mid-tone matte shades in a little bit better. I find if I don't use a lighter shade, that's when I end up having patching with matte shades, especially if they're more mid-tone or deep tone shades on my fair skin. It's just like super noticeable if it's not blending perfectly. Then with the same brush I was using with the face powder, I'm going to pick up the shade here called Nothing to See, and I want to pick it up with a very light hand and then tap off any extra because I really want to try and start out with a light hand. It can be done with these shadows, like to use a light hand and have them look a little bit lighter, but I feel like it just takes a good bit of time. Like you really have to blend and work your way up with very, very light layers. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. But with this palette, this is a good example of one that I would typically reach into that Milani Whiskey Business palette just because it has so many good matte shades. I can use some of their lighter ones to help me. I don't want to dip into any other palettes today. I love palette bingos because they help you pick shades to use that you probably would never pair together. Like when I dip into that matte green shade, I almost always, if not always, dip into one of these green shimmer shades, but I'm not going to be doing that today. If I don't dip into a green, I might dip into this shade here called Second Skin. It's a more golden shade, but I've never just used the 5 of these together, so I really like that. It's kind of the same logic as like if you go to a restaurant, you tend to order the same thing. If you dip into the same palette, a lot of the times you're creating a couple signature looks that you like from that palette, and so a palette bingo can really help switch it up and make you like your collection that you already have even more versus wanting to go find another palette to create a new look out of, because you can probably create that same look using what you have when you're looking at any new palette. I'm going to take a little bit of this shade as well and run this on the lower lash line. Again, with light layers, I just built up this shade a little bit more into the crease, but I think now I'm ready to dip into a couple of the other matte shades. For me, anytime I pair together pink and green matte shades, I like to put pink on the inner portions of the crease and then green towards the outer portion. I'm not really sure why. I think it probably boils down to just not really liking green really close to the center of my eye, but I'm going to go ahead and start out with this shade here called Untouched. Again, I'm going to tap my brush off because I want to get just as little bit of pigment from the beginning as possible. And I'm going to put this in the very inner portion of the crease. And then switching to another brush, I want to pick up the shade Down to Earth. Same thing here, just a little bit of the pigment. And I want to put this on the outer portion of the crease and then blend it in to the pink shade. I'm going to go back into the shade Untouched and touch up the pink a little bit more because it did get a little bit covered by the green. Okay, I'm gonna let that be it for all the matte shades. So now time for the 2 shimmers, and I do want to use the NYX Glitter Glue. I tend to always use this with this palette just because the shimmer shades are very intense, and so depending on the day, I feel like depending on what base makeup I wore and even what mascara I wear, it can almost like break apart the shimmer shades a little bit. And I think that's something to do with just like the pairing of products underneath it. But especially if you use like a heavier layer of the shimmer shades on my eye shape, I can find that it creases some. And this seems to really help it to not do that. I actually want to start with the shade Stripped Back. This is that kind of gunmetal silver lavender sort of a shade. And I want to put this on the outer portion of the lid. I was kind of considering doing a bit of a halo eye, but I want to start with it on the outer portion and see how I'm feeling about it. Yeah, I think I will do that actually. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this shade onto the inner portion as well. I love this color. And I am picking this up on a brush. I find that these shimmer shades really do well on a brush or with your finger, which is not the same for every shimmer shade for sure. Okay, then I'm going to flip the brush over and pick up the shade Naked Eye, which is our 5th and final shade that we have to use in today's look. And I'm going to put this in the center of the lid. This shade has a little bit of a brighter glitter kind of reflect in it, so I think it will do really well on the center of the lid in between that kind of lavendery gray shade. And it's pulling quite lavender in person. I hope that it is on camera too, because I think it looks really pretty. This is also a palette that I tend to do my eye makeup first with, so I'm getting a little bit of glitter flecks kind of falling as I'm applying this, but I think I'll be able to brush them away pretty easily. And with this shade, I'm going to pick up a little bit on my finger and just tap that right in the center just to make it a little bit more intense. Then with the very first crease brush that I was using with the shade Nothing to See, I just want to take the brush, I'm not adding anything else, and I want to blend right on top of those shimmer shades just to kind of help it not be so harsh right there in the crease. I'm going to take just an empty, clean brush, brush away any of that fallout. Then I'm just going to curl the lashes and add mascara because I think I'm happy with it like this. I don't think I want to add anything else to the lower lash line. I'm kind of liking it just with that very first shade we put down there. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. I really like how this look has turned out. So I was able to use all 5 shades that we drew for the palette bingo, and I didn't dip into any extra ones, which I know sometimes I do, but today I stuck to just the 5. I have never created a look that looks like this from this palette. Like I mentioned earlier, I've never used all 5 of these together that I can think of, and it's definitely something different than what I've created before, which is really exciting even from a neutral palette. So I hope that this video could show you guys that a palette bingo can be fun to do in your collection, not just on your colorful eyeshadow palettes. This to me is a great way, like if you wanted to use one palette for the whole week, you could do a palette bingo every single day, and you can always just pull like even one shade that you want to incorporate, or pull 3 or pull 5 like I did. I think it's just a really great way to cycle through your collection and make you more excited to use your products. If you're struggling to use the products in your collection, I have a video about tips to get it back into makeup and get out of a makeup rut. I will leave that video linked down below for you guys, and I'll also put it up in the eye. So I hope that that's helpful for you guys, because I know that sometimes I find myself in a makeup rut too, but creating a look like this can really help me pull myself out of it. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you've watched to the end of this video, thank you. I really hope that you guys enjoyed. If you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing to my channel. I have a lot of really fun videos coming out that I'm super excited for. One that I'm more excited than others about, and I hope that you guys will be too. So definitely stay tuned to my channel, because that's going to be coming very soon. I have something sitting next to me that I'm just waiting to incorporate in that video, so I hope that you guys will enjoy that. But that's all I have for you guys today. I'll see you in the next one.